Alright, here's another video about the same bike that I've been talking about, and in this video I'm going to talk about the total list of upgrades, the sum total of the upgrades that you can do on this bike reasonably without re-engineering the whole bike, because obviously the reason why you'd go for this bike is the frame and maybe the rear roll-off hub. That's pretty much the only motivation, and everything else is subject to improvements of one form or another. And I've certainly showed in my prior videos how you can do some of those improvements, but it's never enough. So we're going to talk about literally everything that you can do on this bike, and we have to begin somewhere. So let's start with let's start with the front wheel, for example. So now there are some good things about the front wheel. So mainly the rim, the 40 mil. What was it? The Alex rims. 40 mil. Just going to make my brush a bit smaller. So 40 mil. I think it's like MD40. Alex rims MD40. So that's a good rim for up to maybe about 3 inches tire. So if you go above 3 inches, then it's going to get a bit uncomfortable. And there is a reason why you'd go above 3 inches that I'll discuss in just a moment. So the rims are fine for most people. They certainly are fine for holding up a 3-inch 45 North Rathchild tire that I've got on right now. So that's good. But I mean, you may end up rebuilding the wheel when you change the fork and the hub. So let's talk about the hub. So these hubs, let's write it down here. This is a Novatec hub. Novatec. Now, Novatec and Joytech and some of the other hubs, they are OEM hubs. So they are just run-of-the-mill hubs. Nothing special about them. Nothing fancy. It's just a black piece of, well, metal, plastic, whatever. So if you are going to be redoing the wheel, for example, for the boost standard, because this is 100 mil, and the boost is, of course, 110 mil. So if you're going to be redoing the wheel for the boost standard, then you're going to be choosing a new hub. So that's something that we'll talk about when we talk about the wheel overall. So essentially, the reason why you would change the wheel in the first place is for changing the fork, this part. So the fork, what's wrong with Suntour Ion or the Fox Performance 32? Well, the Ion just freezes in cold temperatures, and it's also not very comfortable. So the kind of dampening that you have here and everything, it's just not. I mean, once you move to a proper fork, you realize what I mean. It's just not an awesome fork. Now the upgrade that you get from Reese & Miller, which is the Fox 32, I believe, Performance, is okay. So it's going to give you a much better experience by definition, almost, because anything will give you a better experience than a Suntour fork, trust me. But it's still not perfect, so that's why I don't recommend going for the upgrade. So you go for the Ion and then you upgrade it. Now, in terms of what to upgrade to, I would say there are 2 possibilities. I can't think of more than 2 possibilities personally. So I'm going to put them down here and down here. So one possibility is to go for what I went for, which is the Fox 34. That's the fork that actually, well, it is a type of fork that is included on the Delite 25. I'm going to put it down in some other color. So the Delite 25, the 25, uses a Fox 34 with 100 mil distance, and it's a non-boost. So it's just an ordinary kind of fork. It might be one of those e-bike specific forks, but in any case, it's not the most awesome thing that you can go for. So I kind of cross it out because there is something better that you can go for, which is, of course, a plus specific fork. So this fork, the one right here, is 27.5. What Fox calls the 27.5. And then there is the 27.5 plus. So the difference between those two is that the clearance is even bigger. So if the 27.5 is like this, then the 27.5 would be marginally wider. So this is interesting because both of them are boost forks. Both of them have space for a boost hub, but the way the hub is connected is different. So here the connections would be closer towards the center of the fork, whereas here they would be symmetrical with the legs. And as a result, even though both of these are just identical boost hubs, they will fit the same wheel on this hub. The clearance around the 27.5 is huge. So 3.0 tires is the minimum that you would install, and then so 3.0 on my fork looks just about right. It looks a bit thin, to be honest. So really what you can go for on a 27.5 fork is you can go with something like 3.5, or even I would say 3.8, although at around this size you end up with a bit of a problem with the rims. So I'm gonna just draw some connector here. So there we go. So the MD40s might not be sufficient to go for the 3.8 inch tire, because remember, if you buy a 27.5 3.8 inch bike, like I have, for example, the Salsa Black Bottle bike, you're gonna get 80 mil rims. So 80 mil and 40 mil. You can see there is twice the difference here. So I'm not saying you need 80 mil rims on a front fork, by the way, on this particular bike. So here's the idea. So this is one potential option, to go for the Fox 34 and I suppose the Fox 36, which has slightly thicker legs. Well, I think it's in millimeters, so maybe 2 millimeters extra legs. So I don't know much about Fox 36 forks. I went for a Fox 34 because I found it in the 27.5 plus size, and so I'm happy with that. Now, the other option, which I personally considered, and which I might still go for on some of my bikes, is an e-bike specific fork from Magura, specifically the Magura Baltron. Now, let's talk about that. So first of all, the Magura Baltron actually uses a 20 millimeter through axle, which means that the 110 hub doesn't work. Well, the 110 part does work, but typically it is 15 110, whereas for the Magura you would need a 20 110. So that is one difference. It is a thicker through axle to support presumably more strain on the wheel, but there are a few downsides to the Magura Baltron. First of all, the Magura Baltron does not have this little thing here. It does not have a bridge between the forks because it's an inverted kind of fork. So the fork is just like this, and here is the hub. So your typical fork also has this little bridge, and this is where the bottom parts of the legs would be attached. So that's a different design. Now, what I've read about the Magura Baltron is that it is difficult to service. So that shouldn't really surprise you, considering it's an inverted fork. It's not this kind of design of fork. It's kind of like this. So it's an inverted fork. Now, one consequence is you cannot have a mudguard, because there is obviously nowhere to fit it unless you somehow attach it just to the legs and have the mudguard kind of be attached just there. Now, you can't buy mudguards which attach just to the legs. So they look ugly, but you can get them. So that is the e-bike specific solution. Now, in terms of pricing, I think the 27.5 Plus and the Magura Baltron are fairly equivalent. So I think I saw the Magura Baltron for about €1,000 or 1,000 US dollars, and the same goes for the 27.5 Fox, maybe slightly less, maybe 900, but personally I paid about 525 for the Fox 34 because I found it on eBay, and things are quite often cheaper on eBay, surprise surprise. So that is the front suspension. If you are interested in obviously rebuilding the wheel, now one thing you have to be aware of is that this hub, the Novitec hub, is actually, it has different size of flanges on the different sides of the wheel. So the Novitec hub is kind of like, it's this on one side and this on the other side, and then here is the actual body of the hub. Now, this is a problem when you swap out for something like, in my case, I went for Project 321 hub with ceramic bearings where the flange sizes are identical. This means that the spokes coming out of here are a bit short to go. Well, actually, no. The spokes coming from here are a bit too long to go onto this kind of hub. Oh, I think, well, you see the problem here. So it's the asymmetry. So you might want to think about spokes beforehand. So look at the size of the spoke on the larger, I think, size of the hub, and then order an identical part, or just order new spokes for whatever hub you decide to go for, actually. Okay, so that is that. Now, in terms of what else can you upgrade on the front wheel? So the front brake disc, I think it's 180. That's fine. I wouldn't say, I personally, I'm not keen on doing any kind of improvements or any kind of, brake improvements on the front wheel, just because from experience, I know that the rear brake pads wear out more, which means I'm using the rear stopping power more. So here the brakes, these are of course the DRXT. I am now repairing my front brake after tearing it with this mudguard. So this mudguard came off, the wheel aided, and it tore through the actual hydraulic line in this location. So I'm now having this repaired. Hopefully it should be done sometime today, actually. So the RXC, I wouldn't do much with it. I mean, if you're going to upgrade the brake system, then you're going to be doing it wholesale. I wouldn't say that the front brake is the one that the front brake is what I would focus for. Now let's talk about the mud guards. So these mud guards, they are SKS 65 mil. They are OEM. So you can only buy them through the distributor of your bike. You can't order them directly from SKS or Reese Miller or anyone else for that matter. They're not available in the shop. They are too narrow for 3-inch wheels. Obviously, they are good enough up to 2.6 inches. That's their limit basically. So if you want better mud guards, one thing I've seen is people using 80 mil. I tried ordering them on a site called 7020 Bike, where they go for something ludicrous like 160 euros, but there's been a problem. They are trying to charge me even more than I paid. They want me to pay for delivery, saying that delivery wasn't included in the price, and it's all becoming messy. And at some point, I'm going to do if they don't respond, I'm going to do a PayPal charge back, kind of reverse the transaction, because nothing has actually been shipped. So another possibility is some sort of fat bike mud guards, because well, if you think about a 26-inch wheel, so a 26-inch wheel is a bit smaller, but then people put like 4.8-inch tires on them, which kind of brings you to a similar diameter, I think. And so if there are some fat bike specific mud guards, I'm sure you can sort of get them into shape. Now this attachment, this part, attaching to the legs of the fork, is super fragile. I destroyed one part almost immediately, and of course when the wheel chewed up the front mud guard, it destroyed the other one instantly. It was like torn out and just thrown out on the road in just a blink of an eye, basically. So those are some of the things that I would do about the front wheel. Now let's talk about the tires. Actually, the tires, they affect both the front and the rear wheel as well, but there are different possibilities for the front and the rear. So on the rear of the bike, you are limited by about 3 inches size tire. So some of the stock solutions that recent Miller ships, they give you either a 2.8 inch Supermoto X, which is the Schwalbe tire, or they put on something like 2.35 inch Rock Razor. Depends on the configuration. Okay, so you can do 3 inches. I think that's going to be fine. If you do 3 inches spiked, then the mudguard is going to go off. In fact, I have problems at 2.6. So if you put in 2.6 I spiker, they're going to start scratching the mudguard in this particular place. So, and obviously with a 3-inch spiked, you are also going to have that same problem. So I removed, at least during the winter, I removed the rear mudguard, because it's just another problem, another accident waiting to happen, so to speak. So personally, I would say that 3 inches is kind of the ideal size here. So for winter, it's kind of winter. So I would use maybe 45 North Wrathchild. Or if you want to save some money and get a slightly less performing tire than the, so that's 3 inches, you can get a 2.6 Ice Spiker Pro. That's actually a fairly fresh tire. Okay, so for summer, things are actually different depending on whether we're talking about the front wheel and the rear wheel. So on the rear wheel for the summer, I would just go with something that's, 3-inch conventional tire, like a WTB Ranger. I wouldn't go for a knobby nick or anything like that. I think those tires are really, for summer, they are just too turbulent. They create too much turbulence, and the rear suspension doesn't compensate for that well enough. Trust me, it doesn't. It's not that responsive that it would swallow those micro fluctuations. So that's the rear tire. Now let's talk about the front tire. So we're slowly running out of space here. So let's talk about the front tire. Okay, so on the front, things are different because, as I said, if you put in a 27.5 plus fork, then 3 inches is minimal, and you can go up to about 3.8, roughly. That's my estimation, maybe even more. It feels like with 3 inches, it feels like I have an inch on each side of the wheel. So 3.8 certainly fits into that. If you go for something bigger, then I have no idea. Now, the question is, would you want to put in a 3.8 and have this asymmetry? Now, for most of you, the answer is no. So just go for a 3-inch. Now, unfortunately, I live in a city, and a city which has never planned for bicycles in the first place. So we have curbs all over the place. So it's like you're going on a flat road, and then there is a curb of about 10 centimeters tall, and you have to go on top of it. Now, I do have a really nice suspension fork, so that's fine. But having a thicker tire, a front thicker tire, just makes going over either this curb or bits of ice. Like, they knock off the ice off the roofs of buildings and leave it on the ground, so you have these like huge blocks of ice lying all over the place. So 3.8 in this case is sensible. Although I'm talking about the non-spiked variety. So once again, now we're going to split here. So for winter, I'm once again using the Wrathchild 3-inch. And for summer, there isn't really much choice in terms of plus tires, because there is the tires like, for example, the Maxxis Minion FBF. Obviously, I have it on the Salsa. But its tread pattern is, those kind of Christmas tree kind of tread pattern. So it's a fat bike thing, and I don't really like it. So my choice here would be the Hodag. The Hodag from Bontrager Trek bikes, I guess. That's the 3.8 inch. I got one right now, so we'll see how it goes. Unfortunately, there are consequences to having a 3.8 tire. So you need a rim which is bigger than 40 mil, and well, at least in my case, what's going to happen is excuse me, I'm going to have a second wheel, basically, because I don't want to change this wheel. So it's going to be a second wheel for me. I don't know what kind of size I'm going to go for on the front. But it's going to be big. It's going to be maybe 60 mil or something. We'll see what's actually available on the market, because obviously I still need the boost hub on the one hand, and on the other hand, I do want everything to kind of fit here. Oh yes, and the tubes are different. So you need a special tube for a 27.5 3.8. But that's pretty much it. So these are the plans, so to speak. Now let's get back to the picture. Once again, so we've done the front wheel and the rear wheel to some degree. Now, the one thing that's perfect about this bike is the light. I would totally leave the light as is, because that's pretty much the best that you can get. If you know something that's better in terms of automotive lights, high-speed lights, then let me know. But this light doesn't have the best light distribution, because it's just it looks kind of like this. it looks like a light, and then there's a bunch of LEDs on the top and a bunch of LEDs at the bottom, so it doesn't give you a fluid light fall off. It's very uneven, but even so, it's just so powerful and so good that I enjoy it. What can we talk about now? The stem. That's this part. This is fine. I like the stem. In actual fact, it's better than the one they have on the Delite 25, where they just went with something cheap and nasty, or at least something not as good looking, shall we say. Handlebars, well, as I said, I like the trekking handlebars, so for me it's the NC17 trekking. They kind of extend upwards, and so they sort of, you hold them right about here. And oh, by the way, the grips. So the grips, these are ordinary Ergon GB1. I would go for the bio leather. I have them on one of my bikes, and it's just the kind of grip that fits the price of this bike, shall we say? Right. So let's talk about some of the other parts. So rear suspension is this part. I would go for the typical Fox float. I'm not too fussy about the rear shock, to be honest, because it's you hardly ever need to lock it out. I mean, I put a child on the rear rack, so maybe I do have to lock it out, but typically you don't. So I would just maybe leave it as is, maybe install some Fox. You cannot install those DB Creek, whatever, Cane Creek DB, blah blah blah, massive fat shocks, because there's like a tunnel here, and the tunnel is fixed size. You don't have the space for those really thick shocks. So sorry about that. You can't have the most fancy shock on this particular bike, but you can have those expensive Fox ones. I think some of them are like $600 or something. Very expensive stuff. Okay, so the seat obviously goes. This is generally a personal preference. I use the Surface RX Cruiser on mine. You can go for whatever you actually like. Maybe you are a masochist and you enjoy destroying your prostate and whatever, in which case you can just keep what you have there. The ABUS border lock is fine, although this little latch mechanism here, there's like a flap thing that goes on top of the latch. The latch part is a piece of plastic that just fell out, so it doesn't close properly in my case, which, well, that's just sad, really. Okay, I also lost this part, the tip of the stand. I lost it, and I don't know how to replace it, so now I'm scratching all the surfaces where I leave my bike, but pedals, once again, a personal preference. The ones that I use are from the Shimano Saint line. But I also like 45 North Helva. And I have some other pedals, which are also beautiful, that we're using for our builds. So, now let's talk about the chain and the whole roll-off thing. So generally I'm okay with the chain. Some people, what they do is they re-engineer the dropout here so that there is a little thing like this with a hole supposedly for a derailleur, and they put a chain guide which goes like this. They put a chain guide for roll-off. It's a special roll-off chain guide. You have to buy it, and then they thread the chain like this, and it goes like this. So there is no wheel here. Personally, I don't think it's such a big deal. I think that the setup that I have right now, I don't have any issues with it. Yeah, when the chain stretches, it gets kind of saggy. It starts to sag down below like this, and it's a bit infuriating. But the bike still operates fine. When your chain is falling off, just replace the chain. That's when you know that the chain is actually doomed. Rear mudguard, as I said, you want something that is wider but not too wide, because the spacing here, the space down here, isn't really great. In actual fact, this entire rear bracket could be a bit wider, to be honest. They could have made it wider, accommodating the... But of course, it's not enough to make the bracket wider to accommodate a thicker tire, because you have the chain as well, and changing the chain line is a bit of a problem, because the hub that's being used here, the Rohloff hub, is an ordinary 514 hub. It's not the XL hub that you would use on a fat bike. So you could re-engineer the entire frame around this idea of this being a fat bike, and it would actually be a much better bike, to be honest, because I don't see any reason not to have fat tires on an electric bike. I mean, it's just, you know, if you go into snow or ice or anything, you get better traction. It's just a better deal. That's why people like the high bike full fat so much, because, well, apart from looking really good, it's just fat tires. Okay, so let's talk about the dropouts. So the dropouts are removable. It's basically a piece of metal. So on the one side, it would look something like this. So that's the side that we're looking at. So this is, I don't remember if there is actually a hole. I think there's a hole here. So that is where you place it on top of the whole thing. And that's where you attach the wheel, obviously. So that's one side. Now the other side is different. The other side goes like this also for the other part of the wheel. But I think here, I could be wrong, but I think here you have the placement of the rear brake. So that's where the rear brake would actually go. And then there is the brake disc going kind of like this, I suspect. Not to scale, obviously. So the brake disc goes kind of like this. Now what I want to do is the wheel here. So what I want to do is I want to actually extend this to maybe go, I haven't actually decided how to do this yet, but maybe go in this kind of direction, extend this thing, and then install another brake mounting point here that would go kind of like this, and then that would allow me to run two hydraulic lines, two brakes basically on this bike. Now I need it because I find that I brake with the rear. I brake with the rear wheel, not so much as the front wheel. And so I wear out the pads really quickly on the rear wheel, traveling at high speed, sort of 40 kph or thereabouts, 30, 40 kph. So having two of those, which would wear out together when I press, because there's going to be a single lever. So you have this idea that you have a single lever. So here's the brake lever. Here's the handle. And then what happens with the brake lever is it just goes into an outbreaker. So here's the outbreaker thing, and then there's going to be two cables, and these two cables kind of connect. One here, well, one from here, and one would go to here, something like this. So that's what you need an outbreaker for, not just to allow people to brake with one hand on both of the hydraulic lines, like the front and the back, which is okay for, well, it's essential for disabled people and people who find difficult to brake with both hands. I guess that's really helpful here. So that's the idea. The rear dropouts, once again, you can order them from Reese Miller, and so that's what I've done. I've ordered an extra pair so that I can then take it to the shop and have it lathed in the design that I want. I don't know if I want the chain tensioner, the Rohloff chain tensioner, but maybe, why not? I don't know. It's just, you know, they're just pieces of metal, nothing complicated about them, and so should be just fine fixing them in there. Okay, now there isn't much to say about you know, the drive or the batteries here. There isn't much I can do about them. Obviously, I would prefer if you know, if these were down to batteries sort of sticking out, maybe like this and like this, something to that effect. That would be much nicer, but we can't have that until the whole thing is redesigned. The rear rack I'm perfectly fine with as is. It actually seems to handle a lot more than 25 kilos. My son is 30 kilos and it seems to be handling just fine. So this is the spectrum of upgrades you can do on the Reese Miller Delite. If you can think of something else, then leave a comment and you know, we can discuss it. So that's it. Bye.